Greetings. Peace to all the gods and goddesses on the path doing the work. Just give me a second. We're going to get set up here, get things bear with me 1 second. Just got to get up the phone line. All right. I think we are good. All right, we want to welcome everybody to the show. Just going to quickly go through some announcements, then we'll bring our guest Baal Kadmon on. As you do know, ritual at the end of the month, August 30th, Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm going to throw these out there real quick, just for the sake of getting on late. If you need to contact me for a spiritual consultation, a reading, you'll see the description box. In the description box, the email to contact me for any of the aforementioned. Then we have the event on the 27th to the 29th, 25th to the 27th of October. I know some of you have reached out to me for that. If you're interested in presenting at that particular ritual, it's a 3-day event. There'll be different classes, workshops, things of that nature, and speakers and presenters. If you would like to present on an occult or a left-hand path topic, send me an email, space permitting on the itinerary. We will get you in, all right? I think this is Baal here. Greetings, Brother Baal. How are you? Hello?
Hello?
Yes. How you doing, Brother Baal?
I'm good.
I'm doing good. I'm just going to get the volume. Let me just adjust the volume.
No problem.
All right, and I think we are good. All right, we want to welcome you back to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
No, always a pleasure. And I know you're busy writing books and doing what you do, so I know, appreciate you taking the time out. If you could briefly, obviously, I know majority of my regular listeners are very familiar with you, but again, what I like to do, just in case there's some brand new listeners and maybe they've never heard of you before, could you please introduce yourself, what it is you do, and also give your contact information, your website, and how people can also reach out to you in addition to that?
Sure. Thank you. Again, my name is Baal Kadmon. I've been a practicing occultist for a little over 30 years now and writing about it actively for the last 4 or 5 years. I bring to the table sort of a unique perspective. Part of it is that I can read a lot of the original texts that these occult texts are written in, biblical texts and things of that nature, and I try to bring that into my work in a way to clarify, because as some people know, I'm sort of a stickler about translations. They're very important to me because they can make a big difference in how people understand texts, and that's what I bring to the table, is to open those things up in a way that may not have been opened up before, especially for the occult community. All of my books are on Amazon. You can also go to baalkadmon.com, and I have courses there and links to the books. They're all to Amazon, and I'm constantly bringing in more information. I have a lot of information I'm yet to release, but that's pretty much what I do, and I try to be as succinct and accessible as possible.
Right. And just to let listeners know, because YouTube now has done away with the Google Hangouts aspect, we do not have the ability to bring anybody in live. So since we have Brother Baal on the phone, please put all your questions in the chat. We'll forward those questions over to Baal when that part of the show comes. And we were here between 8 and 10, so put your questions in. Doesn't matter if you put them in early, that's fine. We'll scroll back up. I just want to kind of give everybody an alert on that. I know sometimes we cannot get to all the questions, but if you put them in early, the earlier I see them, I'll scroll up when we get to that portion of the show, and we will go through that. What I also want to put up, this is Baal Kadmon's latest book. A lot of the information we're going to be talking about tonight is going to come from this book here. So I'm going to put it up there on the screen as you see it. Baal Kadmon, Devils, Demons, and Ghosts in the Hebrew Tradition, Romance in the Sitra Achra. This is his latest book. Again, as he said, you can get it on Amazon. It's a great book. I'm going through it for the second time. Again, regardless of where you're at in the cult, but if you do deal with the Klipothic tree and some Kabbalah work, you'll really appreciate it. And we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. So, Brother Baal, if we could start with the basic, can you explain one of the aspects of the title of your book? What is the Sitra Achra to those that may not know or never heard that term before?
Sure. So the Sitra Achra literally means the other side. And it basically, if people are familiar with the Kabbalah, we have the tree of life, the conventional tree of life, with Keter at the top, Malchut at the bottom, and the 10 nations. Most people know it as sort of like this positive tree that discusses all the emanations of how God created the universe and the different attributes of God. So there was, as the Kabbalist Rabbi Isaac Luria, or the Ari, states, a crisis in creation in which something, and it sort of seems odd that he would use that term, but that something sort of went wrong when God created the universe from the void, essentially, and which actually we'll talk about later.
Right.
And this dysfunction, what happened, caused part of the tree to sort of break apart, because what was happening is the light that was coming from creation, from what they call the Ein Sof Or, came going through the tree of life. And again, these are very metaphorical terms.
Sure.
Was too much for it to handle, and so when the aspects of the tree broke or shattered, those shatterings are called klipot. And the reason why they're called klipot is because it literally, the term klipa means shell. And what is that shell? Inside that shell is sort of the DNA of the tree of life. And so, but because they broke away from the main body of the tree, they themselves became their own tree. So they're sort of the opposite of the I guess you could say, the right hand tree of life. They are the left hand of the tree of life, and that's where you get sort of the names of Samael and Lilith and all of that. And essentially, Samael, in many ways, is sort of the equivalent of God, but on the left side, the left side of the tree. So it's essentially a parallel tree to the main tree, but it's sort of the left hand, sort of, I guess you could say, darker side.
Right. Now, I want to get into that in a second, but I want to back up a little bit. In section 4 of the book, or part 4, Evil in the Kabbalah, if you could talk, I know some people that, there's two different approaches. Obviously, there's some people who have more of maybe I don't know if religious word is the right approach, but more of a Hebrew mystic approach to it, and they may not fully grasp, that concept. But in your book, you talk about it a little bit. If you can explain, I know you get into the origin of the Kabbalah there before we go to the other side, but kind of give a little history on that. And then when you say evil I know you kind of just talked about it a little bit, but explain to listeners who may not have read the book yet and are interested in getting it. What do you mean when you say evil in the Kabbalah? That might be something that people may not be familiar with. And I know you kind of just touched on it a little bit, but if you can go into a little of the history of it.
Yeah, well, obviously the term good and evil are clearly very loaded words, and it already betrays where those terms come from. Whenever you see in Judaism, Christianity, Islam for that matter, you hear the term evil or something, then you immediately think of this sort of like this separation between almost like a warring side.
Right.
But if you look in the Kabbalah, essentially what it is, the term evil is simply a term that they use, but it's not evil. It's essentially just the darker side of, literally the other side of creation, and you sort of need it. It's sort of like how I mentioned back that when you look at nature, for example, you see beautiful flowers and daffodils, but you also see a man-eating tiger and a venomous snake. You know what I mean? That's not evil.
Right.
It's just I guess you could say, and it's a term that I've used on your podcast before, I guess you could say it's fierce. It's sort of like a fiercer type of energy. So it's essentially just a different form of this overall power. And the only reason why it's called evil is because clearly there's a religious bias there, that anything that doesn't conform to a particular religious concept or idea is considered evil. And but really it's not evil. It's, I guess you can say, like I said, just a fiercer aspect, like the goddess Kali. She is by no means evil.
Right.
I mean, she's not evil, but she's fierce. And so
correct.
That's really what is meant by that term evil. But I had to use that term evil because that's the term used within the Hebrew tradition. But like I said, it's really a very vague term, and it's one that they use, but really what it is a description of sort of the darker side of things. And darker does not necessarily mean evil.
Right. Now, I know the last time we discussed this book when it first came out, and before I get to the next two things I want to discuss, in your opinion, because I know last time we went through some of the different breakdowns of specific demons, aspects of the adversary, which you break down well in the first half of the book. For the practitioner that may be trying to understand the Klippa, the Sitra, Achra, the void, the darkness, how important would you say? I mean, and again, just from an experience of doing this for so long, how important would you say it is for the practitioner to kind of have some of that ancient text history? I think it's important. That's just my opinion. I think it helps in your study and your journey. But obviously, the way you wrote the book, it appears to me it's important. How important it is for the practitioner to maybe have an understanding of a lot of the stuff that you break down from the text.
Yeah, I mean, personally, because it's sort of like how I have approached it.
Right. And
the only reason why I approached it is because I know those languages. If I did not know those languages, I don't know how I would have felt about it. But now that because I do, I realize just how important it is. I'm not saying that the practitioner needs to now, take a lifelong course in Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek for that matter.
Right.
But at least to be aware that these concepts that are written there, remember, we're all reading English translations, and so we have to be aware that none of these texts are written originally in English.
Correct.
And that is including the Bible, and that's the Old and New Testament, and all the books that come after that. They've all been written in different languages. And so when the practitioner is looking at these texts in the English, just to keep in mind that there is a chance, and it's a pretty big chance, that there is a mistake there. Because certain things cannot be translated quite right. Correct. But if there's anything that seems odd, if let's just say a text, someone who translates a text, or rather writes about a text, and they use a certain term, they say, "Oh, well, the Hebrew says this." Go and actually look that up. make sure that it's actually used correctly, because recently someone asked me something, and there was a write-up about this one word, and I was like, that doesn't, to myself, I said, that doesn't seem right to me. And I looked it up, and in fact, it didn't really mean what the writers said it means. It may have sounded correct, but it wasn't. So I think that the practitioner really just needs to, be aware that these are translations, and to realize that what's written in the translation, even the names, we have to be careful of. I mean, just to give you one more thing about that.
Sure.
There's a meme that's going around, and it sounds funny, but it's actually really important for what we're talking about. There's this meme that's going around saying, sort of proving that the New Testament is wrong. And what does that meme say? It says, how did Jesus find disciples by the name of Luke and Andrew in the Middle East? Okay. Now, on a surface, you're like, oh, wow, that's true. There was no Andrew or Luke in the Middle East? Well, that's because those names are not actually in English in the original. They're right. There is no Andrew or Luke because that's in English. Those are English translations of Greek names. Right. So, but people are reading that meme as if that's actually the real word, that those are their names, literally. Right. But no, that's only in English. So it's very important because that meme has gone around and people are like, yeah, that's right. But you see, it's a mistranslation. Everyone's falling for that mistranslation. Correct. And so it's and things like that, when you see something like that, look it up and see what the name is in Greek, actually. Sure. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yes. No, very, very important. I agree 100%. This is one of my favorite sections in the book. And before we get to the clip and the Sitra Achra, you have several pages on existence before existence. And I think this it helped me a lot for those that utilize this path in their spirituality. Talk a little bit about that. How did you tap into this concept? Because I think this is a good starting point to kind of get you to that void in darkness. It kind of takes you in. If you can explain to the listeners the section that you wrote on existence before existence.
Right. Perfect. Well, okay. Basically, before there was anything, there was void. Okay. This void, just like in the Bible, how it says in the beginning that there was chaos and void. Right. And within that void, apparently, is God, essentially. Perhaps God is that void. Okay, whatever spirit is in that void. And within that void, according to the Kabbalah, God, or whatever, or Creator, whatever it is, through this darkness and void, wanted in some way to differentiate itself from itself. It's a very interesting concept.
Yes.
But what is that? How does he do this, or how does it do this? It creates something called the Ein. There's a light that comes out, and it's called Ein. There's actually three levels of it. It's Ein, Ein Sof, and Ein Sof Or. Which Ein just means without or nothing, or not, or not limited to something, or without end. Right. So Ein Sof Or means light without end. Okay. And so this light literally pushes in to this void. I mean, really, there's no other way to describe it, because there wasn't anything there. You know, it went right into empty space, and it's through that light that the emanations start forming. Okay, literally that light. So literally within the void, creation comes forth. Right. Okay, the primordial creation comes forth. And so it's very interesting, because really out of darkness and void comes the light. I mean, the darkness is the container of the light. The light is not the container of the darkness, but the dark container of the light. And that light is what creates the backbone of everything, of the tree of life, of existence itself. And so everything comes from that point, including the left and the right-hand side. Everything comes from that point. Right. And so, so that's really existence, before there was even any type of name. There's no way to name it. There's nothing there that you can say is tangible, because it's literally the primordial existence. It's even before what we would call the Big Bang. I mean, it's sort of like this primordial existence, and from it, everything emerges. So it's good to know that, but that also shows to everyone that the very basis of everything, of light, of darkness, of left and right, emanate in this void, in this ground. I guess you could say a very Hindu term, I guess, the groundlessness of being, and it's hard to describe because it's an eternal thing. Because every point in eternity is the same point because there's no beginning, no end. So if you were to walk in an eternal space, you would never get anywhere because there is no beginning or end point. So that light is formed in that eternal space,
right?
And it's very, very a very profound thing. And so that's why when some people do certain occult rituals, certain meditations, and they tap into that's
right
where you really feel that energy, is when you tap into that stillness, because it's like this. I don't know exactly how to describe it because it's such an experiential state. But that experiential state is the existence before existence.
Right. Appreciate that. Now I want to continue on there. I want to actually read a short section from your book, and I want you to elaborate on this because I think this is important for people to understand. And I'm kind of going to ask a couple of questions in reference to this. What you just talked about, then you kind of you bring it up, and I'm going to quote. And this is from your book in the same section. In it, all the archetypal ideas and values that make up not only the soul of humanity, but the entire cosmos becomes expressed. This expression comes in the form of the primordial human called Kadmon. I want you to explain this so listeners are clear on this part here, and I'm going to stop and have you explain this. Kadmon signifies the broader divine will. It is not fully manifest, but includes the blueprints of all creation. Kadmon is a world unto itself, one of five. Please understand that although Kadmon is described in anthropomorphic terms, his meaning is to express that not only is man the embodiment of earthly creation, but also of the divine. I'm going to stop there. The reason why, when we are reading, if somebody is incorporating that research from the text, as you do so well in the book, when you're correlating these characters, and in this specific case, and then I'm going to get into the five lights emerging. But before we do that, I want you to explain how should we look at, from an occult perspective and working with this path. Because I guess we're the debate, and we talked a little bit about the historical aspect of the text. Some people look at Adam or Kadmon as a literal person. Some paths look at it as symbolic. And there's, in my opinion, how you break it down is a little bit more in depth. So how should we look at this when you're talking about this character or this person being explained here, Adam or Kadmon? What's the best way for us to grasp what you were trying to write in the book?
Well, that's a great question, because I think one of the misconceptions when reading the Kabbalah, especially this part, is they associate Adam Kadmon or Adam Kadmon as Adam from the book of Genesis. And so people tend to get them confused. So and that's where I think some people think, oh, Adam Kadmon is the first man. But no, it just the term Adam just means man. It's actually not even a name. I mean, people are named Adam, but in the text itself, Adam just means man.
Right.
It does, or person. It doesn't. It's not actually like a name. But in the term of Adam Kadmon, as I said, they're expressing the concepts of the Kabbalah through this anthropomorphic term, because it's easier for us. So basically, the short answer is that it's a symbolic meaning. It's not an actual person. Adam Kadmon is not an actual person. What it is that it's a representation of creation in the anthropomorphic form of man. So it's sort of like an archetypical. Basically it's the microcosm and the macrocosm inside this anthropomorphic symbol called Adam Kadmon. And Adam Kadmon, the reason why it's called Adam Kadmon is, and it's using these anthropomorphic terms, is so we can relate to it. But also, it's showing just how important humanity is to creation. But even more, I would say, even more, if you want to go even more granular than that, it also speaks to who humanity is, what humanity is, and then that we are part of. We're one of the embodiments of earthly creation, but also of the divine. So literally, the everything is created. It's almost as if it's created in our image in some way, but really, it's the archetypical symbolism of everything, and that we are part of that, and we are. And this Adam Kadmon, which is this primordial archetypical man, contains all the elements of creation in it. So the only reason why they're using the anthropomorphic term is because it's just easier to understand. But it really has no body. You know, when you really think about these forms, they don't have a body.
Right.
So in order to explain these concepts, they had to use a term that would make it more palatable. So that's why they say, okay, well, we'll call it Adam Kadmon, which just means primordial man. And the first thing people think about is the body of man. And the thing is that's how the Kabbalah actually explains it. So they'll be like, all right, the head of Adam Kadmon is this. The legs of Adam Kadmon is this. But really what they're trying to do is try to make it simpler for people to understand by using anthropomorphic terms, because otherwise there would be no way to explain out all of this.
Correct.
Because there's no, how do you explain eternity? You can't say it's without beginning. You can't say it's without end. Those are both labels of something that has no tangibility to it. So that's what Adam Kadmon really is. It's an archetypical, symbolic term of which all emanations, all archetypical understandings are derived from it. As an anthropomorphical term.
So let me ask you a question. Now, this is jumping ahead to something, but connected to what you talked about. So that very famous quote that you hear in Christianity, mentioned out of the book of Revelations, which they attribute to the character Jesus. Is there any connection with when, I'm the Alpha, the Omega, in essence, the beginning and the end, which really there is no beginning, there is no end.
Right.
Talking about that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. I don't want to jump your question. I'm sorry. You're saying, is there a relationship between what he said and Adam Kadmon?
Right. Is there any connection to that? I mean, symbolic. I mean, obviously we can look into things and try to make the personal connection ourselves. But when we hear that statement, as you just described, is there any, in your opinion, is there any connection to that or on any shape?
I would say symbolically there definitely is, because the Alpha and the Omega are contained in Adam Kadmon.
Right.
So, yes, and because Jesus, some people say, he's the essentially the second Adam. And of course they're talking about Adam, the man, the first man. But if you look at it deeper, what he might be saying, if you wanted to go this far, is that he is Adam Kadmon.
Correct.
That through him, everything is created, and that would jive very well with the Christian understanding. Certain groups to say that Jesus is essentially the embodiment of creation. Remember in John 1:1, before everything was the Word. So the things that Jesus and Adam Kadmon, I guess you could say, have a symbolic similarity, absolutely. So, again, we're talking very general terms. I'm not sure how many people would, especially Kabbalists would not want to make that connection.
Sure.
But neither would the Christians, for that matter. But yeah, definitely, Alpha Omega is perfect within Adam Kadmon, because that's through Adam Kadmon essentially the beginning and end have started.
Now,
start there.
I have to connect this because we're still dealing with void and darkness and this illusionary concept of time. I'm going to come back, but I have to go here with this because All right, when this character that we're talking about, Jesus, I'm bringing it into because I know you've written books on some will call Melchizedek, depending on the pronunciation. Now they refer to Melchizedek in the Bible as the Ancient of Days, having no mother, no father, no beginning, nor end. And I say that to bring up because in the book of Hebrews, in the 5th chapter, and this is where I think it gets lost in transition. I've had a lot of discussions with reverends and pastors, and I get a million different interpretations on this. So when it says in the Bible, how are we to correlate this? Because it says that Christ also glorified not himself, that he was a high priest after the order of Melchizedek, and he's the Ancient of Days. He has no beginning, no end, no father, no mother, and there's no you can't trace his genealogy in the Bible. We find him mentioned in Genesis. You know, we where the tithes come from when Abraham comes back. You see him mentioned there. You see him mentioned in Psalms. He's mentioned all the way from the very beginning in Genesis, Psalms, the book of Daniel, in Hebrews in the New Testament, all the way up to Revelation. Your thoughts on what does that character represent and its connection to Jesus?
Well, interestingly enough, I don't know if you know, I actually wrote a book about Melchizedek.
Right.
It's one of the newer ones called Melchizedek Unmasked. I actually go through the entire identity of Melchizedek from the Old Testament all the way to the early church writing. So I go, pretty deep in there. I guess it would really depend how you want to view Melchizedek, because the reason why the New Testament sort of glorifies him, because in the Old Testament, there's sort of nothing there.
Right.
You know what I mean? And
yes.
It's just that he's a high priest. He's apparently of an order that predates the order, the priestly orders of the 5 books of Moses. So this is before the Levites, before the Aaronites and all of them. It's this mysterious priesthood that we don't know anything about.
Correct.
And so there's a lot of rumors about who Melchizedek is. And again, so what they're trying to do is it depends on the school of thought that you are in. But according to, like, for example, the Gnostics or the Gnostic Christians, Melchizedek and Jesus are almost pretty much about the same person.
Right, I've heard that before. Yep.
Yeah, they're the same person, and apparently this priesthood is one that is almost elite. It's the highest of the priesthood that sort of overrides all other types of priesthood within the biblical tradition. So Jesus, because of what he represents, he is essentially the embodiment of this priesthood, which, by the way, it's only a priesthood of one or a priesthood of two.
Right.
And if Melchizedek and Jesus are the same, it's really a priesthood of one.
Right.
Then he embodies what that priesthood is, and that priesthood is the purest of the pure, the highest of the high you can go. And the Old Testament, of course, doesn't give you any information on what it is.
Right.
But that's why they jump on it, because it's such a mysterious thing. And the reason why, by the way, they made the connection between Jesus and Melchizedek was because in the Psalms, the Psalms of David, he mentions it, and they actually quoted that same verse in the New Testament.
Right.
So
yes,
it really depends on what you're looking at. But if in the beginning of the book, Melchizedek Unmasked, I actually go into some depth of what I think Melchizedek might have been. I'm not, I can entertain some New Age thinking,
right,
but I don't believe, I sort of don't believe that there is an order of Melchizedek. Like today, people say, "Oh, I'm the order of the Melchizedek."
Yeah.
That's, to me, could it be? Of course, it could be, but there's no historical precedence for it other than a few lines here and there.
right.
in the Bible. But if we were to look at the Christian text, even the Gnostic text, it's pretty clear that what they're trying to do is tie Melchizedek and Jesus together, almost implying that Melchizedek was Jesus and he was the one who was speaking to Abraham back then. Because remember, they're trying to make Jesus show up everywhere in biblical history.
Correct.
So they say, oh, well, he was Melchizedek. You see, he was from the very beginning, and they use the term, when God said, let us create man in our image, what do the Christians say? Oh, that us is me, is God the Father, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So they're trying in many ways to connect Jesus to Melchizedek, but really there's not a lot that can be said about Melchizedek except for some stories in the Apocrypha. He's actually a relative of Noah. You know what I mean? So it's like, there's all of these stories that abound.
Right.
But but I would say that if you wanted to look at the Gnostic texts, it's a clear connection that Jesus and Melchizedek, may have been the same person. But again, it's one text against another. The Jews would probably not agree with that.
No, that's why I wanted you to expound. And I'm going to get back into the thing with Adam and Kadmon. But the last thing on that, does the book, your one of your recent books you just mentioned, Melchizedek Unmasked, because a lot of what you just described, which some people may or may not be aware of, the kind of the Catholicism and the priesthood base their whole concept on that whole concept of Melchizedek, Jesus, and the priesthood. And even if you read the Catechism of the Catholic Church, they kind of talk about it a little bit. Do you go into any of that in the book at all? Show how that concept emerged? Because I have not read that book yet.
Well, I go into some of the early church writings, and they were actually very conflicted about this. We have on one side where they say that Melchizedek was, and this is also in line with some Jewish texts,
right,
that he was actually he was actually the son of Adam and Eve. After Cain and Abel, the whole incident of Cain and Eve, he had not Adam and Eve, Noah's son Shem. Okay, they said, oh, Melchizedek is Noah's son Shem. So some Jewish people do believe that, and one church father, Ephraim the Syrian, he believed that too, because I guess he was a little bit biased because he was Middle Eastern, so it actually works to his favor that actually my ancestors are Melchizedek. Then you have like John Chrysostom, who was the Archbishop of Constantinople. He compared Melchizedek with Jesus.
Right.
Okay, and like I said, some of the church fathers did say he was the same person, whereas others say that, and this was a little bit of a rogue idea, is where they said, okay, Jesus was sort of almost like a partner with Melchizedek, where, and this is in some early church fathers, even though they would say that this would probably be a heretical view for some, where they say Jesus came and was the intercessor between God and man.
I've heard that. And
they said, well, whereas Melchizedek was the mediator and intercessor to the angels, between the angels and God. So, and these are all found in some very early church writing. But like I said, most of them went on one side or the other, basically stating either it is Jesus or it's not, or it's Shem. But they even created the whole Eucharistic ritual based on Melchizedek.
Correct.
The early church did, because remember he fed Abraham, and so they made the Eucharist. The Eucharist is essentially in some ways related to Melchizedek. So the early church was very much aware, and they were sort of like I said, split as to what he really was. I mean, I doubt if you go to a Catholic church and say, well, Melchizedek is Jesus, a lot of them might say, well, no, I don't think so. Whereas some of them might say, well, yeah, he might be. It could be. And then the others that they say, Melchizedek and Jesus are just two different people, mediators for two different spiritual systems. So there's actually some early church writings making Melchizedek higher than Jesus.
Right. And the last thing on this, I know we diverted a little bit, but I gotta just finish up on this. There's another school of thought out there on that. And in your opinion, one, in your breakdown of the name, I know some say the name Melchizedek or Malachi Zadok in the Hebrew translates as angel of justice. I don't know if that's correct. If you can elaborate on that, number one, the meaning of the name. And two, I've heard other school of thoughts, and again, it's just a school of thought, where some say they have attributed Melchizedek to the angel Michael, and they've tried to verify that by the very first chapter of Revelation, because some scholars will say, well, this was a book was sent and signified by Christ's angel, who was the angel Michael. Have you any research on that, or have you ever heard of that school of thought where they correlate Michael and Melchizedek as the same character?
Yeah, I don't recall reading something directly about that, but it does seem that many very strong and when the angels are not named in the Bible and they're very powerful angels, they're all Michael. You know what I mean? Like, they're. It's like, oh, Michael was this, Michael was that. I didn't hear anything directly saying that Melchizedek was Michael, but there's some indication that he was some type of another form, another type of angel.
Right.
But there's also another thing that's very interesting here with Melchizedek, and like you said, his name means actually King of Righteousness.
King of Righteousness.
But it's actually framed Melchizedek, so it's my King of Righteousness.
Okay.
Mine. So, but also that name could also refer, and I make the case for this in the book, that this might be a reference to a Canaanite god. That Melchizedek is actually a reverential term for a Canaanite god named Sadok or Tzedek.
Right. And
the reason why I say that is I go the chapter right after I state that is that there is a king in Canaan, okay, that also has the last name of Tzedek, okay, which is very interesting. And so he's a Canaanite king, and his last name, well, it's not really his last name, you know what I mean? But his name is Adonai Tzedek, which is my Lord is righteous, or my Lord is Tzedek. He's also the king of Jerusalem, okay, as was Melchizedek. And they both have the same suffix as Tzedek in their names, and they're both kings of Jerusalem. I make the case, I actually think Melchizedek might be a king in Canaan, a Canaanite king.
Right.
You would have to go through the book, but I go through everything. I go through the Dead Sea Scrolls. I go through everything. Yeah,
we might have to definitely do something on that. All right, I know we diverted a little bit. We're going to get back. It's just that when we were talking about this void, darkness and time and no beginning and end and all, it just, for whatever reason, it just kind of took me there. So, all right, I don't want to.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, I don't want to divert too much, but I want to finish back in existence before existence, and then we'll go a little bit into the Klipat. You talk about, if you can explain, out of Adam and Kadmon, the 5 lights emerge, the 3 worlds are created, and you talk about the 10 emanations of the 10 Sephirah. Can you kind of explain that? That's kind of where we left off before we got a little sidetracked with that.
Right, yes. All right, so the 10 emanations are the tree of life, where the first one is Keter, which means crown. Second is Chokhmah, which means wisdom. Binah is understanding. Then there's like this third mystical one called Da'at, but we're not going to discuss that because that's actually a little bit more complex. So it technically would be the 11th. But then there's Chesed, which is kindness. Vura, which is strength. Tiferet, which is beauty. Netzach, which is victory. Hod is awe or splendor. Yesod is foundation, and Malchut is kingdom. So it's the 10 emanations. But regarding the 3 worlds that are created or that have emanated from Adam Kadmon, actually sort of predates the tree of life, and
Right.
basically there's three of them. There's the world of binding, okay, which is called akudim. In this world, there's 10 lights. The 10 sefirot, the 10 emanations, are in one single sefira, and one single sefira, one emanation.
Right.
But that was a very chaotic system, and there was only potential for creation.
Right.
So basically, what I'm explaining is how the 10 emanations formed into the state that they're in. They went through these three worlds, and it's not the same four worlds that that there's another four worlds that is even more complicated. But then they have the world of points, which is called Nekudim, and it's at this point those 10 emanations, those 10 lights, are in 10 different sefirot. So there's 10 lights and 10 different sefirot. So again, that was a little bit chaotic and a little bit unstable, and they were not really connected to one another. Right. And then we have the world of flex, or the birudim, which contains 10 interrelated lights in 10 different vessels, and that is the tree of light, right. the current tree of life that we see. So basically, that's the evolution of how the tree, as the light was coming from the Ein Sof to create the tree of life, right. It went through these worlds before it finalized itself in the 10 emanations. And then, obviously, the crisis of creation starts, and that's when all of a sudden the klipot start to show up. Exactly, which we're going to get into in a second. Again, I just want to remind listeners, in about 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, we're going to get to the questions. I see people, you've already started typing in. If you came in a little bit later, type in your questions. Again, we'll scroll to the beginning of the chat and we'll get to all those questions, but I just want to make sure you get your questions in there when we get to the portion question of the show, and we will forward them over to Baal Kadmon. He'll answer any questions you have in relation to the topic we're talking about tonight. The book, again, if you came in late, I just want to put the book out there again. I'm going to put it up on the screen. A lot of the information that we're talking about is coming from his book, Devils, Demons, and Ghosts in the Hebrew Tradition, Romancing the Sitra Achra. And we were also mentioning, when we were just a few minutes ago talking about Melchizedek, he also has a book, Melchizedek on Mass, which I'm going to have to get. I haven't read yet. A lot of interesting stuff in there from what I just heard him talk about also. That's the other book reference. And again, all his books are available on Amazon. You can purchase them there. And again, baalkadmon.com is his website, where he has kind of everything linked and connected. So I want to continue, Baal. Then you go on. Now we're getting to the meat, because in this same section, Existence Within Existence, I'm going to read a short thing again. Now you start to talk about how this starts to break down and how we start understanding the other side, the Klipot tree. So I'm going to read something. I want you to explain this to the listeners. And I quote from your book, the section Existence. Same section. Let me make sure same section. Each shattered sephira still has a light within them called, and I may be saying this wrong, I might butcher this, nit zutat, if I said that wrong, or sparks. These sparks are the creative engines of the sephira. However, now the sephira are not whole, so the creative energy is not used properly. The energy continues to malfunction and descends downward. The sephira are not all that exist in this primordial space. There is void as well. The same void just prior to creation that is recounted in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. The void is in the spaces in between the Sephiroth and surrounded them. As the shards fall through, the Sephiroth, especially that out of the Sephiroth Gavora, breaks off and falls within these gaps of void and starts to form husks around them, sometimes translated as shells in Hebrew, klipot. All right, if you can explain a little bit of that, because now we're seeing how this starts to form and come to being. If you can kind of explain that section right there a little bit. Okay, great. Yeah, this is actually that's actually the key part. This is the moment of creation of the klipot. Right. So basically, as I stated before, in an ideal world, and just like the way Rabbi Isaac Luria said, that there was a crisis in creation. He actually didn't use those terms, but that's really what it was, in his mind at least, was that when the light the Ein Sof Or, the light, the divine light was traveling through, the Sfirot could not handle it. Okay, and so the Sfirah Gevurah, or strength or judgment, started to essentially collapse, and not collapse, but sort of break apart, and created these little sparks, these little shards. And so what happened is that, remember, that the tree of life it was just created within that void. Remember, there was nothing beforehand.
Correct.
Until that light came, and that the Ein Sof Or. And again, these are very metaphysical terms, and so I'm you don't want to go too deep with them, because then you start losing. So I'm going to use very very human terms for it, because it's really the easiest way to describe it. So what's happening is that as the Sefirot are starting to shatter, pieces of them fall not only down into other Sefirot, but they're also shattering outside the tree of life. And
Right.
So what's happening is, and what's outside that tree of life is that void where the tree of life is being created within. And as it's literally falling through the tree of life and surrounding it, the fall itself is sort of creating an outside shell, almost like a scar tissue of some sort, I guess you could say.
Right.
And it encases that light, whereas previously, remember, the light is not encased,
Right.
but now it is encased. And so that, all of a sudden, what happens is that these encased pieces of light, sometimes called hitzonim, or sort of like outsiders,
Right.
sort of develop their own existence. And so although they're still made up of the same exact, primordial light that everything else is created out of, but because of that fall, and because that one Sfirah Gevurah, which is judgment and harshness,
That's right.
is so overwhelming in its characteristics. Because remember, it has nothing holding it back anymore. It blew up. So that energy starts going down through the tree into those gaps and forming its almost its own existence. And so the left-hand tree is created by the klipot. I mean, I guess you could say in many ways, Samael is not only the sort of the king of klipot, but he embodies
That's right.
the klipot. I mean, he and Lilith, actually, because they're actually on two sides. Lilith is the bottom part, Samael is the top part of the left-handed tree of life. And so basically what that is that energy is again, I'm using the terms that, because in the Hebrew tradition, I don't consider it necessarily a malfunction,
Right.
but within the Jewish tradition, it is a malfunction, because these shards are not supposed to happen. They're supposed to be whole. It reminds me of the Dark Crystal. If you've ever watched it, remember when the crystal, when the shard breaks off,
Right.
what happens? All of a sudden, you have this light side, and then you have the skeksis, right? And
Right.
so the skeksis represent, of course, we're using modern day terms, represent the klipot, represent the shells, but they're still part of the same system. Because in the end, when that shard is eventually corrected and put in its place, it unifies. The tree becomes one again. And so essentially those shells, by breaking off, create a separate existence that its whole purpose is to, again, this is according to the Kabbalah, right? Its whole purpose is to, in some ways, overtake the rest of the spiritual system. It's almost like there's almost a very matrix feel to it.
Right.
So that's why there's this constant battle, but really there's no battle. What's happening is that the energies actually want to come, they want to become whole, both sides, but in that process, it sort of, I'm going to use the term malfunction.
Right.
They're they're sort of fighting one another, but it's not really fighting. They're actually made of the same essence. It's just that they broke apart, and now they're two separate beings. And that's why Adam Kadmon is such a great anthropomorphic term, because it also represents man, and it's through mankind,
right,
that we can take the shards, the klipot, and unify them with their right-hand counterpart. So like through good deeds and through all those types of things, supposedly you can raise those klipot.
right,
And if and so basically that's why we're so important in the Kabbalah, because man is so important, because we can do what is called tikkun olam, which is to fix the world.
mm-hmm.
And doing that is by unifying all these shards that have broken off back into wholeness.
Right.
And that wholeness is not necessarily good or evil. Actually, if you really think about it, it's actually neutral.
Correct.
Because, before that split between the klipot and the other parts of the sfirot, it wasn't good or evil. That didn't exist. That didn't exist until the shattering of sfirot. That's when all of a sudden we get this idea in the Kabbalah. Okay, now the klipot are sort of dirty. They're pushing us to sin. Whenever you sin, you strengthen the klipot. Whenever you do a virtuous deed, you bring the klipot back to their original source. You see, so it's this constant struggle with the klipot,
right,
that the Kabbalah is really trying to remedy.
right,
But really, it's going back to neutral state,
right,
not to the right side, not to the left side,
correct,
but to the middle.
correct,
To the middle.
right. Now, in that same section, I know we had talked a little bit about this earlier, but you kind of answered part of the next question, but I want you to elaborate on this. When we talked about that term earlier with the Kabbalah, the evil aspect of the Kabbalah, but you just kind of explained it, but the next section of the book, that term, and again, I'm gonna read a short section here. The main reason they get their evil character is because they have a larger portion of the light of the Sephirah Gabora. Gabora is the Sephirah of sternness. You just talked about this a little bit. Judgment and strength. Without the balance of chest, they become stern and full of judgment. It is for this reason so many of the demons in the Jewish tradition are called demon or angels of judgment. Satan himself is the adversary and the one who is a harsh witness against mankind. Thus, the engine behind the klipot is sternness, judgment, and severity. They are, in essence, a disturbance in the matrix, if you will, because they are of the Gavor. They are very powerful. Now, why I wanted to read that now, I want to take that concept you wrote in the book. Now, this is how I've applied this to myself from reading your book and working with the Klipotic tree, etc. But I use this. This is how I take this concept, and maybe you can elaborate if you had something a little bit different. Now, for the practitioner, because as we know, this is a very powerful energy, obvious, because what we're really working on, how does this tie into self as the practitioner? Because obviously we're unlocking portions of ourself that are very powerful. Now, there are some that will say the precautionary aspects of working with this path and the energy to be very careful, because it can create disturbances in one's life that may not be maybe in the right mind state. In your experience, and maybe even, in teaching others and students you've had over the years and just writing your books in general, what is your experience when you unlock these demons and these energies that we're talking about here? What is important for the practitioner to know, to be aware of? Because in my opinion, it's something that really should be approached, and not to scare or spook people out, but I think we should really approach this educated and informed. So in your experience and experience with others, how do we apply this now to self as practitioners, and what should we be aware of?
Sure, no problem. Well, just 1 second before I go into that, I do want to address that again. The term evil,
correct,
is only because that's what it's considered in the Kabbalah.
Correct.
And remember, these Kabbalistic texts were written by rabbis that had specific ideas of what good and evil were.
Correct.
So they made the klipot and everything. They called them evil. Okay, so I'm not calling them evil. I'm just simply relaying that information because I did see a comment there. Why evil? that's how they describe it. I'm not saying that they're evil myself. Remember that the book is an elucidation of what is in the Hebrew tradition. It's not, I'm not saying that these things are evil.
Sure.
But to answer your question, because these energies have such strong tendency towards the Sphira V'Ram, there's a lot of sternness and severity. You have to be somewhat careful while using them, because it's sort of like electricity. And I use this analogy all the time because I think it's perfect. Is, if you plug in your computer or what have you into an electric socket, the computer is going to come alive. Whatever you plugged in is going to come alive. But if you wet yourself and stick your finger in there, you're going to come alive and then die. You know what I mean? So the thing is that it's the same energy, but it has to be honed in a certain way. So consider them, the klipot, and these entities, as being sort of these very powerful electrical forces that if you hone them into your character correctly, you can use that for your benefit. But if you just let the energy in raw, it can burn you. It can burn you, just like you were saying. Some people, it causes a lot of difficulty. I've seen it myself. I've seen people, tap into, Samael, and they lose it. I don't know what happens to them. They transform. They can't deal with their life.
Correct.
But then there's the other side. And actually a few weeks ago, someone contacted me because I do provide a meditation between Samael and Lilith in this book, and people were like, "I feel so at peace."
Correct.
So yet they're using the same energy. So, and that's the whole thing. How is it that someone can do use the same energy? One loses their shit, and the other has become so tranquil.
Correct.
You know what I mean? And that's the thing. It's you need to, first of all, approach it without fear. Now, because fear is essentially like dousing yourself in gasoline and going near an open flame. Because and that applies to all magic, even if you're using magic with angels. Okay, you have fear that can actually harm you. Some people will even tell you that angels be harsher than working with demons in some instances.
Correct.
So you want to approach it in a way that you go in confident, but also strong in yourself, because again, you're tapping into an energy that as they say, as I think it was, I don't know who said this. It was in the Bible where it says, it says God is no respecter of persons, and really what that means is that it the same with these demonic. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't respect your humanity. It's above your humanity in that way. So you want to approach it and integrate it inside of you in a way that is stable. Because remember, it is an electrical force, if you want to look at it that way. So you want to hone it. You want an intention. You don't want to just say, just come inside of me. You don't want those things. And it's not like you're just inviting hardship. So basically, you can also embody the energy, but you have to be very specific about it. You don't want to just be like, just enter inside me and see what happens. You don't want to have that type of interaction. You want to be confident. You want to be sort of strong-minded when you deal with these energies, and they can help. Those energies can help you in any aspect of your life, but you have to use it wisely. It's a hammer can put a nail in a wall and also smash your head in. You know what I mean? So that's the thing. People have to be aware that these forces are not bound, by anything specific, but you can help sort of hone them in for your own archetypical work, for your own magical work. And many people too. I do see people who use them, use these forces in a very organized, direct way, and do get the benefits, and don't have these bad effects. So, it really is how you approach them.
Right. And I'm glad you mentioned that. And for somebody that, let's say, is interested in working with this, and I know you mentioned there's a meditation in here, and I think the book itself is a good start. Any other suggestions you can give? And again, I think your book is a great suggestion for the person that wants to, know how to work with this, because you cover, as I said, you go from the Kabbalah, you break the whole thing down, and then you get into the energy. And that's kind of why I wanted to talk about this tonight. Is there any other suggestions you could suggest to the brand new person who wants to work with this energy? Any steps, things you might suggest to them? Maybe somebody watches this video after it uploads and they're interested in this. What would be the first step you would suggest in your experience? And I know the book definitely can give you a lot of ideas, but anything specific you would suggest to the brand new practitioner on this?
Well, I'm of the strong believer that the more you know, the better off you are.
Correct.
And I think that first, when people are just starting out, I wouldn't be so quick to just jump right into the practice. Sometimes that's fine. I mean, if you feel you're ready for it, but I suggest, reading, like, for example, like you said, thank you for saying my book's a good place to start. That is, I think so as well. And the only reason why is because I cover so many topics. But really, my book is just a stepping stone for more research. My book is not the end all be all. So all the ideas that I write in the book, I encourage people to then look up these things themselves, to be like, okay, let me see what else people are writing about this. So really, for me, knowledge is potential power. So I advise people to read, get knowledge, and then slowly dip their toes to gain experiential knowledge. Because obviously, in the end, it really is about experience, and the knowledge is good and it helps you. But with all spiritual paths, left, right, whatever, in the end, it's experiential.
Right.
Okay, that's the whole point. But sometimes you need some knowledge to help guide you, because some people just jump right in, saying, "Oh, this book says I can call this demon," and they just do that, and then all of a sudden, they find themselves, with all these bad things happening, and it's amazing. I get emails too, and the first question I'll ask is, "When did you start doing this?" They're like, "I don't know, like a few weeks ago." And I said, "Have you ever been in the occult before or anything?" No. So I'm like, okay, well, you see, basically, again, back to the electricity thing. That's like saying, okay, you know what? I'm going to fix my own electric socket. I have no experience in electrical, and you know what I mean. So it's like, at least read up first a little. You know what I mean? But I understand practitioners go into the same thing for me. When I first started, I went in because there were aspects of my life I wanted to change.
Right.
So
that's key.
You don't have 10 years to study. You want to get into it right away, and I understand that. But I would still caution that you still at least learn a little bit more about it, and then step into it. Read other people's experience, but keep in mind, other people, might have their own issues, and that's why sometimes they have very bad effects. So you shouldn't necessarily be afraid either, because like I said, I have half the people using Samael are like, "Oh my God, my life is the best." And half the other half are like, "I'm a wreck. I don't know what to do with myself."
Correct.
You know what I mean? So, take the testimonials with a grain of salt and just do your own studies. So basically, learn and then practice, but don't stick to learning for too long, because then you'll never get anywhere.
Correct. I know, I agree, and I'm glad. Great advice, and I'm glad you broke that down. And one thing I've always said, I mean, this work probably is a little bit more, you get a little bit more complex than detail. But one thing I've always said over and over is that you have a gift in your writing style. You're able to pack so much information, regardless of how many pages the book is. But I think the gift that's been bestowed upon you, it's very simple. You explain it where if you're an advanced practitioner, it's right there on the money. If you're brand spanking new, you still can grasp it. You don't make it complex in all your books. Even with your ritual work, you simplify it. I've always been along the line, less is more. That's just the way, that's the way I roll. But I think you have that gift in your writing style. So for those that may not, newer people that have not, I definitely would check out Baal's books on all his topics, because he covers a wide range. I mean, this is just one of the many. He's not a one-trick pony. He's not one-dimensional. He covers the occult. When I say he covers the occult, just go look at his book titles, and you will see whether it's talking about this, or whether it's talking about Kali, whether it's talking about any form of mysticism, jinn magic. I mean, you name it, it's there. The last two things I want to get into, then we'll get to the questions, and I'm gonna go through this briefly. Now you get into, in the section of the book, the Klipot and the Sitra Achra. You talk about, now we're talking about unlocking these energies. So now you go through in order the aspects, or the reverse side of the tree, and you use some descriptions of these energies. So I'm going to run through them real fast, and then I want you to explain, because some people might go, why would I want to unlock that? But why I want to go through that is because obviously the work, like you said, I believe too, the practitioner's objective to do this type of work should be to better themselves, to transform themselves, because you're unlocking this. So and real quick, I'm going to go through, and I read, and I quote, the Klipot, as I mentioned, are comprised of the 10 Sephirot, but instead of them representing the positive qualities I mentioned in the previous chapter, they now correspond to Keter, hollowness and baseness; Chakma, irrationality; Mina, despondency; Chest, hostility; Gavora, idleness; Tiferet, crudeness; Netzach, subservience. Hold on. And then Had, rigidity; Yesod, exteriority; Malkut, disharmony. These negative attributes inform the Sitra Achra. So now I say that to say, what would be the purpose as far as the practitioner unlocking these energies, and how can we utilize those things by recognizing them to turn that around to help in our transformation, our spiritual growth?
Like I said earlier, those terms for the 10, I guess you could say, negative spheros, again, are the rabbi's interpretation of what the left-hand path is. But really, the way you would use something like that, because remember, the goal of Kabbalah is to unify the person, not to focus too much on one side or the other, because the whole thing is that you can't know productivity without idleness. You can't have light without darkness. You cannot appreciate darkness if you don't have its opposite to compare.
Right.
And so basically, it's those sphirot, the disharmony and all that, that's the extreme version. Remember, they're looking at this as black and white, the rabbis. They're not looking at anything in between. Okay, to them, the left-hand path is evil. Okay, it's evil, and so that's why they use those terms. But they also say something really interesting, especially this, and this will port in right to your question. A rabbi by the name of Rabbi Isaac ben Yaakov HaKohen. Mm-hmm. That's a nice long name there. Part of it is Ben Yaakov just means son of Jacob. So he says in his text, and he's talking about the left hand, specifically the left hand path. I mean, both right and left, but specifically the left. He says it's a long and deep path, and it eludes all masters of wisdom who are not willing to descend into the depths of wisdom of the hidden emanations, the depths of good, the depths of evil. And so what he's saying there is that as a practitioner, and of course, I mean, he's rolling in his grave, like I said, he was a practitioner of the occult, which he was. what he's saying there is that the true seeker of wisdom, the practitioner, okay, that we would call the practitioner, is someone who embraces the depths of both the left and the right and use it to better themselves. So again, I would take the left-hand descriptions with a little bit of context of who was writing them.
Right.
Okay, who was writing them?
Right.
But really, you can embrace both the left and the right together in a middle pillar, and that's where the truth strength is. Because to tell you the truth, in order to have one, you have to have the other, and that's why you have all of these light workers and all these love people who, no negativity. They, they tend to be the nastiest people on the planet.
You're right.
All these, they're so nasty, and I'm being very general, but I know several quote unquote light workers that are like, no negativity. I don't want to hear anything negative, nothing bad. They tend to be the most egotistical and the meanest. And again, this is from my experience, but I'm not the only one. Many people have experienced this before.
Right.
But you'll also find that on the other side, where the people who hate the light, who are 100% darkness, evil, whatever, but that eats them away too.
Sure.
So there's no balance. But actually, to tell you the truth, some of the nicest people I've ever encountered are the Satanists. Are the, you know what I mean? Are the ones supposedly the ones, but society says, we need to be careful of them. They're, you know what I mean? So because actually what's happening is that each side is being extreme on the other.
Correct.
And so they're actually pushing forth the thing that they are suppressing. So it's literally some of the nicest people on the planet that I've met are the ones who eschew the light, who don't even want to deal with the light. And the meanest people are the ones who don't want to deal with the darkness.
Right.
And so really what the Kabbalah is really saying here is you want to be able to bring those two together. Because remember, as I said, nature is not just flowers and daffodils.
That's right.
A man-eating tiger and a venomous snake.
That's right.
So, you know what I mean? It's part of the same system.
Right.
And I know that's not a very romantic view. Some people do like the view of that there's some type of cosmic battle. But the thing is that really that battle is within yourself.
Right.
It's inside of you, and these spirits represent those parts of you. You know what I mean? That's why you can use them. So, for example, a person who is a light worker who views the dark actually could probably use Samael and use Lilith to bring those aspects out of them, so then they could be more more natural, more more how can I say more natural with themselves and more honest with themselves.
Right.
And that's why I sometimes recommend goddesses such as Lilith to some of these people, and of course they get scared immediately. But then I'm like, no, because Lilith embodies everything. It embodies lust, love, grief, loss, and the need to be heard. I mean, all those things she embodies. And I know it's become cliched. A lot of people are like, oh, I'm Lilith, I'm this, I'm that. But it's actually a very good energy to have, because actually Lilith, even though she's part of the quote unquote left-hand path, she actually embodies everything.
Correct.
And she embodies both parts, actually. It's not just, so that's why it's very dangerous to look at things in a black and white way. And although the Kabbalah, and in my book, I'm giving you the information as for how they say it, really, there's a lot of nuance in the practice, a lot of nuance.
Right.
And so that's what I think a practitioner should be aware of. They can still embrace the darkness, but not ignore the light.
I agree. And I'm glad you said that, because I've said over and over on shows, I think Real magician is somebody that is able to embody what we call dark and light energies. And I've always said over and over, you do have people that everything is dark, gloom and doom, and being too dark. That's just as bad as you described the example of that light worker, that they just want to suppress the dark side as if it doesn't exist. You can't shush it away. I think the real practicing successful magician or occultist is somebody that understands both. And I think that's what this represents when we're talking about the Sitra, Achra, the void, the darkness, the apothecary. It's really facing the reality how you have to harmonize both of those aspects of yourself. You can't, like you said, you can't negate one, act as if it's not there, and go to the side predominantly of the other, and vice versa. Because this is how I think fractions and religions and dogmas are started, and this is kind of where I think it goes, it runs awry. And that's why I think you do a great job in your books and your work. You talk about both sides of it, and it comes together, and it creates that harmony. So I'm glad you broke that down, and I hope people listen to what you just said, very detailed, because to me, you just described the formula for being successful on this path. You can't shun the light, you can't shun the darkness. You got to know how to combine both of those energies. So yeah. So what we're going to do, we're going to go, and I want to put the book up one more time, just in case for those that don't know. There you see it on the screen. I have this book in your library, and you are an occult or left-hand path practitioner, whatever you want to call it. This is the book, Baal Kadmon, Devils, Demons, and Ghosts in the Hebrew Tradition, Romance in the Sitra Achra. It is available on Amazon. You can go to his website also, baalkadmon.com, and find he offers classes, different tools he has on the meditation things he offers. He's got a couple different things you can on there. I'm sure there's something on there that you can find as a practitioner on this path. He has different courses in all of these topics. So definitely go to his website. All right. So for the remaining time we do have, let's see how many questions we can get in. Again, I'm going to go to the top of the chat. So be patient. If you type something in at the bottom, we're not going in any specific order. We're not picking and choosing. I'm going right down the line. But to be fair, for those that have been in here early, I'm going to start at the very top and take the beginning questions. All right. The first question is from Mythos. And if I want to make sure I understand this right, the dragon concept, I know which some tie by it and Tiamat. How does that correlate to the Sitra Achra? I think there's a connection there. I make it my spiritual path, but your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, that could go for a long time, but the dragon or the serpent is very, very much intertwined in the Sitra Achra, because we have Samael, we have other spirits of the Sitra Achra that are very closely associated with the dragon, very closely associated with the snake. In some instances, you have Samael either being the snake itself or being the controller of the snake or the dragon. And you know, the term dragon, I just would like to clarify that a lot of people do use the term dragon, but in the biblical tradition, it's the word that's being used it is more like a serpentine type of figure. Like even Leviathan or Leviathan is not so much like a dragon as it is like a large serpent. You know, so dragon is a very interesting term, but usually it's translated as serpent in the Sitra Achra. And if you do see the term dragon, it's that they're probably using it as a placeholder for the term serpent. Okay. You know, and because you won't really see the term dragon in Hebrew, you will see serpent.
Gotcha. Okay, so hopefully that answers your question, Mythos. The next question is from Ritual Spirit. In your opinion, can a Ibor, I know you talk about this in the book, but maybe you could elaborate. In your opinion, can an Ibor spirit possess a human host for the rest of the human host's life? In your book, you stated it is usually temporary to fulfill a mission, and then the Ibor departs. You can elaborate.
Sure. Well, I guess the answer is also within that statement. Like perhaps the reason the war is in that person to fulfill a particular destiny, it might be their entire life. I mean, that's the whole thing. I guess it depends on the destiny. Usually they come in, help the person fulfill some type of destiny, and even their own destiny. Sometimes the war needs to do some more work and will work through a person, but also helping that person through their stuff. It is conceivable that it could be a lifetime purpose. The stories that we have is that it's usually temporary, but I would be very hard I guess it would be really hard to know if it was temporary, because how many people have actually spoken to a boar and said, okay, when did you leave this person? You know what I mean? It could be lifelong. You know, it is conceivable that it could be lifelong. There's no reason why it can't be, especially if the person's destiny or whatever work they need to do, it might be a lifelong thing. So sure, I mean, there's no reason why it can't be.
Right. Okay. This is from Ender Oversoul. And again, I'll read it. Cain, or Cain, as sometimes spelled Qayayin, and Kadmon, same idea as far as spirit of man becoming flesh. Your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, Cain, well, that's the thing. I guess we're referring to Cain from the Cain and Abel story, because especially in the Kabbalah, you know, Cain is sort of like the representation of the baseness of humanity, and so I can see what they're saying. I guess you could say that there could be a representation of like a Cain Kadmon type of figure, where in the Cain Kadmon is all the base characteristics of humanity are present. But also within the Adam Kadmon, everything is present in the Adam Kadmon. But I guess you could, if you would like to use the term Cain Kadmon, that could make a lot of sense, because what Cain represents is, in fact, you know, the flesh, essentially. The flesh, not only the baser matters of the flesh, but pretty much all the experience of the flesh. So, although I've never heard the term Cain Kadmon, I could see how something like that could work.
Okay. Appreciate that. And I think earlier, this question here, when we were talking about I believe it was when we were referencing the three sons of Noah. I guess this person, I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, type in down at the bottom. I'll look. Was asking who the third son. They put Seth. If you were talking about Noah, that should be Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So right, I'm not sure unless again, I'll look further down. Maybe you were referring to something else. So I'll bypass that until I see more info on it. The next question is, in the Hebrew tradition, would the golem, Golem, be similar to what a spirit servitor is, creating the golem through a puppet or a spirit doll?
Okay. Well, there is some difference there. A puppet or a spirit doll themselves are not animate. They are still dolls, and so they don't walk around. They don't have sort of a life of their own in that way. The golem, especially in its original conception, is essentially, not to make light of it, it's essentially sort of like a Frankenstein in the sense that, but instead of connecting, a brain of a cadaver and then, or electrifying it and bringing it back to life, the golem is the use of letters, the Hebrew letters, in different permutations, as in the book, the Sorcery and Sitra, which I'm actually creating a course on right now.
Okay.
Infuses essentially a kind of soul into a body or an inanimate object, but it becomes essentially alive. So it is sort of like a type of Frankenstein type of being. So it's not quite the same in that sense. A golem is a servitor, but in the tradition, it is a walking moving entity, whereas a puppet doll or a spirit doll is not, it has the spirit in it, but it's not moving around. It's not listening. It's not running after people. It's doing so on a spiritual level, whereas a golem is doing it actually physically. So it's a very different phenomenon. But the overarching concept is sort of the same. But again, the golem is created through the permutation of letters of the Hebrew alphabet, whereas the spirit doll is a spirit being infused into that doll. So it's a very different concept, but they're both essentially servitors of some sort. But yeah, again, one has a spirit in it, and the other was created from the letters of the Hebrew alphabet through a magical formula.
Right. Now, quick question. This is something that popped in my mind. In your research, as far as the Hebrew language, that word phonetically sounds very similar to goyim, the word they use for Gentile. Is there any connection between that, or is it?
I don't think so. Golem, it's spelled completely different.
Right.
The first two letters might be the same, but golem and goyim, they might sound similar, but I don't think that they have any particular connection.
I got you. Just curious.
Yeah, but I will say one thing in a more modern context. The term golem is also used as a derogatory term. So, like, for example, because remember, a golem is like sort of a Frankenstein. So he's not smart. He's sort of like an idiot. So it's like if you call someone in Hebrew, a golem, you're sort of saying, you're like a stupid piece of meat. You know what I mean? So, but could they use it as a derogatory term for goyim? Of course, but I've never heard the connection between goyim and goyim.
Okay, I was just curious. All right, the next question. I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, but if you could elaborate again. When we were talking about the husks of the clipothic tree, this is from Justai 3. These husks form what we know as the evil realms. Why evil? And I think you kind of explained that, but if you can go through it again, for maybe those that tuned in late.
They're called evil because in the tradition, their formation is considered a malfunction in creation. So, according to the rabbis, because they deviate from the accepted norm, they're evil because they're no longer part of the bigger body of light. So they've broken off. So then they are rogues, and they're considered evil. It's a very religious term. But if you want to go deeper into that just for a second, the term good and evil should never apply to it. When you really think about it, because there couldn't have been a malfunction in creation. When quote unquote God created the 10 spheres, the tree of life, you don't think that he knew that the light was going to cause that? You don't think he knew that Adam was going to eat off the tree? Of course he did. You know what I mean? The thing is that, so actually I think, if anything, all of these events should never be looked at as good and evil, but sort of like as a comprehensive whole story. But because the Kabbalah remember, there's three types of Kabbalah with a K, which is the original sort of the Hebrew one. They are religious. They are orthodox. Anything that deviates from the orthodox is bad. So that's why they're going to call the Klipot evil. But I even say in my book, I say, I don't necessarily consider them evil, but because I'm relaying the information as it is from those texts, it is evil. But it's, to us it's not, but to them it is. Correct.
Okay. This is a good question here. Actually, I think it's a good question. Meliktos, the peacock angel. In your opinion, does that correspond, as far as the Sitra, Achra, any connection with one of the demons on the tree, Arab, Zarak, perhaps? In any connection? Your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm always perplexed about the Meliktos, how some people would consider it sort of like devil worship or something. But in reality, it's not really devil worship. Melektos is not necessarily a demonic figure. He sort of had his moment, and then of course he was brought back into the good graces of God. But if you want, because so for me, I don't see him as necessarily as a left hand type of deity or entity. He's sort of encompasses both of them.
Correct.
But if you were to look at it in that way, I guess you could say he would be part of the Klipodic energy. He sort of broke away from the main energy, and then sort of became earthly in many ways, sort of the god of the earth in some way.
Right.
So you could say it like that, but because I personally don't view Melektos as sort of like a left-handed entity, I probably wouldn't be able to answer that question fully.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. And again, and I know also he just died, 3 typed in. I did do a show on that, and there is a book, and it is. We also have to understand that comes from a tradition of a group of people from Iraq, the Yazidis.
Right.
So we need to know that too. Very interesting. So I want to put that out there for listeners. That there is a book by Ishak Joseph. Devil worship. It's called. I don't know why it's called that, because I agree. I don't think it should be. But what Baal was talking about is explained in there. So I would suggest for those that want to research the concept of the peacock angel a little further. I find a lot of similarities to Lucifer, the angel of light. A lot of similarities there, and in that story from a traditional aspect. But
right.
Yeah, you guys might want to look into that. Everybody else listening, all right? What else do we have? Question from Mythos. Does Malakut correlate to Lilith as well? She is the mother. I'm understanding right.
Yes, in the left tree, or the left emanation of the tree, she is Malchut, which is the kingdom. She embodies everything that Malchut embodies, which is the earth, which is human existence as well. And her counterpart on the right tree is the Shekhinah, or the Shekinah. And that is sort of like the divine presence in the world. So she is sort of like the antithesis of the divine presence.
Right.
So Malchut and Lilith are definitely in the Kabbalah, pretty much one and the same. She is the embodiment of Malchut.
Okay. All right. The next question: Kabbalah versus Cabal, Cabal. Is there a difference?
Well, that's a very loaded question, because there is a term, Cabal, which is usually negatively associated, but really what a cabal is just a political faction, like a political clique. I guess, like, for example, a gang is a cabal. So, but the term cabal doesn't actually relate to Kabbalah. And see, again, this is where a lot of conspiracy stuff comes in, because they're like, okay, well, Kabbalah, because they sound the same, they must have a relation.
Right.
But not necessarily, because Kabbalah means receive, whereas Cabal means a faction. So it's not necessarily the same. I mean, they say that that it means that it is some type of derivative of the term Kabbalah, but it's, again, it means something different, because Kabbalah means reception and tradition. But the root of Kabbalah might come from the same spelling of Kabbalah, but they actually don't necessarily mean the same thing. I think that because they had sort of conspiracies about certain Jewish sects who studied the Kabbalah, because remember, in Europe, there were a lot of people who villainized Kabbalah, and so they called those people maybe part of a cabal.
Mm-hmm.
But really, if you break, so that's probably where the history of the word Cabal comes from. But in reality, it really doesn't mean Kabbalah. It just means faction, and it's a derogatory term. It just means that the people who studied Kabbalah back in the medieval times were considered suspicious. So they said, "Oh, this is a cabal of magicians, or a cabal of whatever they called them." So yeah, the words are related, but they don't actually mean the same thing. They just happen to be derived from the same general word.
Okay. Appreciate that. A quick question, something I want to intervene. I don't know if you have in any of your books or talked about it. As far as the Klipothic tree in your research, do you do any work, or in any of your writings, do you connect Hecate in any of your writings or workings? And do you see her, or what did you see her places in connection with working with some of these demons about?
Well, I am working on something with her at the moment. I don't have anything published. I do have on YouTube an excerpt from an incantation to Hecate in its original Greek. I actually read it out. It was for a friend of mine. I actually think she's listening to the show right now. And so you can get an idea there. I tend to view her also as a very neutral character. She sort of reminds me a little bit of the goddess Circe. There's a similarity in and how they operate. They're not necessarily love and light, and they're not necessarily darkness. I think that people get enamored with her, I guess you could say, her quote unquote darker side, but really she works on both sides. She's actually one of the few entities in that mythology that you could say you can work with both sides of the magical divide that shouldn't be there, but there is one that we've created. But she's an amazing energy. She's very powerful. I would say that if anything, she is a very nice embodiment of both sides of the trees.
I agree. Because like I said, you'll see her. There will be a lot of people that are, practice what some would call Wicca. There's that lighter side of her, which you'll see, and then there is a very dark side. I've always looked at her as the bridge and the gap between both of these realms, because some approach it, like that. I think she can create that harmony between light and dark energies. That's how I work with her, but I was just curious. Right, so that's interesting to know. We'll be looking forward to that. So there, somebody was asking about that. So there's your answer. So that is something in the works. Another question from Felice long name. Felice Satana said, Conduit question for Baal. Will you be writing a book exclusively on Samael, or maybe you have and we don't know?
Yes, I am working. It's just in its preliminary phases. But yes, there will be just something on Samael alone, because there's just so much to cover with Samael. And what you saw in this book that we discussed today, sort of just, brushes on the surface, because otherwise I wouldn't have time to. The book is so long as it is. Yes. So, yeah, there's definitely something coming. And just sort of to add to that, I'm actually releasing something on Beelzebub very soon as well, and it's devoted completely to Beelzebub. And so I'm actually going to do the same for Samael. It's coming. It's just in its early formation right now.
Okay, good. This question is from Angel Figueroa, and when we were talking about Melchizedek earlier, and this was where I got one of those concepts from. But the question is, are you familiar with, or the same connection made by Dion Fortune in her book Applied Magic, and her teacher, Dr. Theodore Moriarty, held the same esoteric view that Jesus was of the order of Melchizedek. Have you heard that or read that?
Yeah, that's part of some of the church father stuff. That's part of the New Testament implied that the Gnostic Gospels even made the connection even stronger, even implying that Melchizedek and Jesus were actually the same person.
Right.
So yeah. I mean, Dion Fortune and her teacher, they were getting, they were looking at the New Testament, they were looking at the Gnostic Gospels, they were probably looking at the Apocrypha, and so yeah, there's a lot of people that say there's a connection. And like I said in the beginning of my book on Melchizedek, I say, the Old Testament really doesn't say much about him, and I made a connection between him and a king, a Canaanite king.
Right.
But really, yeah, the connection, the true, real connection you can see is definitely in the Gnostic Gospels, and in the early church writings, you'll see a connection between Jesus and Melchizedek for sure. And so Dion Fortune probably was reading those books as well.
Right. And I think maybe the next time when you're available, this might be a topic. I mean, I've always been interested in Gnosticism and, a lot of this stuff that we're talking about. I think this would be an interesting topic. But one thing I want to throw in that before I get to these last couple of questions, because I know we're running out of time. What I wanted to also ask you, in your research, another theory I heard in relation to that, or read, and I can't remember where I read this, to be honest with you, the book of Malachi in the Old Testament. There's been some scholars that can't really attribute that book to a specific individual or a prophet. Some have even said that this character, Michael, possibly Melchizedek, and I've heard that concept, was the author or the revealer of this book. Have you read anything like that or heard anything like that in your research as far as the book of Malachi? Not because if I'm correct, they translate that as my angel. Am I wrong in that?
Well, yeah. Malachi Malachi means my angel, my messenger.
Right.
Yeah.
Because of its apocryphic nature, because the book really talks about end of the world, kind of end times in 4 different chapters. It talks about, a transition, a great apocalyptic event taking place on the earth. So I don't know how, have you done any research? My question simple is, any research on that book of Malachi and its place in this whole concept of what we've been talking about?
Well, Malachi, I mean, it is a little bit strange, the book of Malachi, because, well, first of all, like you said, his name is very, it's a very broad name, because it does mean, my angel, my messenger.
Right.
But it's really interesting because, first of all, we don't know really who Malachi is. And the reason why I think there's a lot of not confusion, I don't want to say confusion, because that means that there's like some misconception, but there isn't, is because in the Aramaic translation, which is called the Targum,
mm-hmm.
There's in Malachi, it says by the hand of Malachi, or the hand of his messenger, but in the Targum it says by the hand of my angel. And so that's a pretty big difference there.
Yes,
to say my messenger and to say my angel, to actually say it's an angel. So I think that's probably the origin of where the Malachi name sort of comes through, and why he's such an elusive figure, is because there are translations out there, especially in the Aramaic, that somehow his name is transposed to mean an angel in one of those clauses. So I think that went down the line and became, started to add some ambiguity to who he is.
Right.
So I don't think we really know. Listen, most of the Old Testament, it's ascribed to certain people, Jeremiah, Isaiah, but we don't actually know if they truly wrote it themselves. Anyway, so there could have been a person by the name of Malachi.
Sure.
But we just don't know. But he's a special case, because his name was translated a few times as my angel.
Right.
So that's there's a suspicion there of what that could mean.
Sure. Okay. And again, just for time's sake, a lot of people, a lot of positive comments, Mythos and others, they're really enjoying the show. They want to thank you again for coming on, thanking me for bringing you on. Well, we enjoy doing this, and we always enjoy when Baal has time to come by. All right, we have a couple more questions. Try to finish these out. This is from Don Cross. Question: the Kabbalah speaks of destiny and one's ability to change theirs. Could you speak on the notion of destiny, and what is your personal opinion on what destiny is?
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Yeah. I mean, the core of Kabbalah is really like a term I used not too long ago in a podcast called Tikkun Olam, which is to fix the world. But in the process of the Tikkun Olam, you're also doing Tikkun Atzmi, which means fixing of yourself. And so, it's implying that there is no destiny, that our fate is sort of in our hands. But at the same time, there are a lot of statements that sort of indicate that there is some type of destiny. And, actually in my college, when I was in college, I wrote my final paper was the existence, does free will exist or not? And I forgot how I termed it exactly, but it's if you look at it really deeply, if you think, okay, well, if the creator is someone who knows past, present, and future, then free will is an illusion.
Correct.
But then and so that's the whole thing. So if you think logically, you're going to run into a lot of problems with the whole destiny question. But at the same time, we can see our actions sort of push us in a certain direction. But maybe there's really a confluence of some form of destiny with our actions.
Right.
Because I just can't believe that people are doomed to be a certain way. There's a part of me that has a very strong aversion to that idea. And but at the same time, there are tendencies. People do have tendencies towards certain ways, but people can change those tendencies. But then again, could all of these actions be rolled up in destiny? Like, it is our destiny to think that we have a destiny,
right,
or not have a destiny. You know what I mean? So
Sure.
it's a rabbit hole that I'll tell you will take hours to unravel it. You'll never unravel it. It's the Gordian knot. There's no way to unravel it.
That's right.
So, so that's a tough question, and that's something that really people have to sit with on their own. But I do believe that our actions can influence how things work. But again, are those actions already predestined? I don't know.
Right. Here's another good question. I just want to throw something in on this quick before you touch on it also. Is the notion of good and evil purely a human construct, even the act of murder, etc.? Now, let me say this, and I know you added murder in there. I think perception has a lot to do with this, because murder for the wrong reasons, just for no purpose, obviously, in my opinion, isn't justified. But then say if you have somebody harming an innocent child, or for protection or defense reasons, then we're looking at it for a whole nother reason. I think perception has a lot to do with that, because if somebody's wrongfully attacking somebody and somebody steps in, or that individual steps in to defend themselves, now we have to look at the act of murder, or what one is calling murder or death, I think differently. That's just my opinion. But Baal, your thoughts on that? Is good and evil purely a human construct, even the act of murder?
I will say that I'm in 100% agreement with you on this topic, is that it is context related.
Right.
You can have two events, same event occur, one with malicious intent and one without. I mean, and that really makes or breaks what that is. So, like, if I slip and fall, and by mistake, as I fall, someone else falls with me, that's an accident. But if I intentionally sort of slip on a side to make them fall, but we still both fall, then it's malicious intent. So really, it is a matter of perception. And I do believe that the concept of good and evil is definitely a human conception.
I agree.
It's our way of understanding things in the universe, but because in nature it's not like that. I mean, look, a lion will eat its own cubs. Okay, it's you know what I mean. But it's not evil But if we were to eat our own children, right? I mean, I don't have children, but imagine, then we'll be like, oh my God, this person's crazy, this person's evil. But whereas in nature, that wouldn't exist. The line would be like, oh, I ate my kid too. You know what I mean? So the thing is that it is perception, and I do think that we create the concepts based on how they feel to us, how it impacts us. If it hurts, it's bad. If it feels good, it's good. Right. But that's the whole thing. They're actually quite neutral, all of them.
I agree. And this is directed at you from Blanca Maldonado. She says, "That's me."
Oh, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Baal, for making that video for me. So I just wanted to throw that at you.
Yeah, that was the Hecate one that we were just talking about.
Okay, cool. All right. I think that looks like the end of the line for the questions. Just want me to make sure I double check. I'm going to skip some of the interaction between, which is just side chatter. Thanks for Don Carr says, thanks for hitting my questions. All right. So before you go, I think that wraps the questions up, Baal. I'm going to give you last word. Again, I want to just, put your information out there. Again, this is the book. And I'm going to tell you, if you don't have this book, get this book. If there's not a book in your library, trust me, you will not be disappointed. As you see, as I breeze in there, I'm into the linguistic thing of it and the history and how he breaks down. He's got Hebrew in here. He's got the English. He's giving you, the book is broken down into different sections. He gets into a lot of the history and the demons in the beginning. He goes in depth. He's giving you translations, a lot of good ancient biblical history in here. If you don't have it, this is the book again. Devils, Demons, and Ghosts in the Hebrew Tradition, Romancing the Sitra Achra. It is available on Amazon, along with, he's got a bunch of, I don't know. Do you know the count you're up to in books, Baal, or you have no idea? You lost count?
I think it's just about 48 or 47, something like that.
Yeah, a lot of books. So again, Amazon, all his books are available, BaalKadmon.com. Me, Baal, I still see you on here.
Okay.
There you go.
All right, now I can hear you, yeah.
Okay. So what I would like you to do is give you the last word. And again, I was telling people, make sure they go to your website, BaalKadmon.com. You offer different classes and courses, a whole bunch of different services you got on there. So I'm going to give you the last word, and again, give your contact information out, and we'll wrap it up.
All right, thank you. Well, I just really the first thing is that I just want to thank everyone for tuning in, and I want to thank everyone who supports my work and has given me such great feedback, because really in the end, when I started this journey, I didn't realize that so many people would really resonate with my work. So really, you're the one I have to thank for everything, and I'm very much appreciative of all of you. And if you want to reach me, you can obviously social media is the best way. Instagram and Facebook. You can go to BaalKadmon.com, and you'll see all the links there. And I do have several courses out, one on meditation, one on lucid dreaming, and there's a few more coming out. And those have been an unbelievable success. So again, thank you so much for supporting my work. And if you need anything, you can always contact me, and keep reading, keep studying, keep practicing. And like I said, I'm always around if people need to talk or want to, have a couple of questions. Like I said, I do get a lot of emails, so I may not be able to get to everyone, but I will try.
No. And any preference or contact, because I also know you have some social media. You also have an Instagram page and a Facebook page. Do you have any preference to be contacted? Is email the best way? What do you prefer? Just so listeners.
I would actually say, tell you the truth, that Facebook is probably the best way.
Okay.
Because those messages I get right away.
Okay.
And Instagram too is fine. Email tends to be slow a little bit because I do get so many emails. But I will say that the social media messages I tend to get to first. Okay. So.
Okay. Cool. All right. As usual, I appreciate it, Brother Baal. Thank you for spending time with us. I know you're busy. I know you're on the go. I'll talk to you about that another time. We'll discuss again when your next availability is, and we'll see what we can come up with. But Dan, appreciate you coming on.
Great. Thank you for having me.
All right. Have a good night.
All right.
All right.
You too.
All right. Before we go, real quick, people, again, thank you everybody for tuning in. Just a reminder, and I know she's in the room tonight, Thursday night. Just a couple quick reminders. We'll have Sister Oni here. She's going to be talking about self-understanding and self-realization, which is, to me, a very important topic. She'll be here Thursday, 8 o'clock, to discuss that. Next week, on the 13th, because we're traveling the next day, we're going to do a show, but we're going to start earlier. That show will start at 7 o'clock. We will have that in a strict time format. We're going to cut it off by about 8:30, the latest, just due to the fact we have to get up early in the morning and fly. So that's the day. The next following morning, we're heading to New York. So we'll have Sister Oni on Thursday, which is the 8th, 2 days from now. Then on the 13th, Raven is going to do a show. I'll post that soon. And again, that show, Tuesday the 13th, will start at 7 o'clock. We're going to start an hour early. Show. We will not run it past 8:30, just due to a lot that's going on. There will not be a show on the 15th, which is next Thursday, because we will not be here. So there will be no show Thursday, August 15th. Just want to make that clear. Then when we come back the following week on the 20th, not sure what we have slated for that. It's open right now. Then on the 22nd, which is Thursday, Dr. Edward Bruce Bynum will be back on the show. We'll be talking about ancient civilizations and modern science. I'm looking forward to that. One of my areas of interest in studying over the years. So I'm looking forward to that show. Dr. Bynum is excited about that show. And then September 14th, we will have Richard K. Page, world-known, renowned Luciferian and author, and possibly a new book of his might be coming out in the next couple of weeks that we might be able to also discuss on that show. He is in the midst of finishing up his new book. Check Richard K. Page out if Luciferianism is one of your interests or areas of study. A lot of good books he's got out. So that'll be a special Saturday show at September 14th at 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Again, we have to do that because Richard he lives in the United Kingdom. There's a 5-hour time difference. He's obviously 5 hours ahead of us. So we try to bring him on early on a Saturday. So it's still kind of early evening hours there. This will be Richard's third appearance on our show. Check the archives for the other two if you missed the other two. He's done 2 great shows. Look forward to getting him back as we go in on Luciferian practices and spiritual principles. It's going to be an interesting show. That's September 14th, 4 o'clock. For all those that are in the current summer online session, just as a reminder, I know you guys know this from Saturday, there will not be a class this Saturday because I will be traveling also, and next Saturday I will be traveling. So we are taking a 2-week break. That's for those that are in the current online session. The next online session, some of you have emailed me. I'm going to probably do that going into the end of the year or probably early next year, start it in January, take a break. I will do 1 or 2 individual private classes in between them, like I did the one on on dealing with your personal daemon. I will do an individual. I know a lot of you have emailed me about doing more of those. So my plan is once the current summer online session wraps up, which is September 7th, I'll take a break for a couple months before I do a full bump, because putting that together it's a little bit of work. Not that it takes time for me to do it. I kind of know, but it's thorough. For those that take it know it covers a lot. So I like to take a little bit of a break in between. So the next full online session will be in the winter time, late winter. But before then, I will squeeze in 2 individual private classes that you'll be able to sign up for, because you guys have requested to do more of those. Sometimes some of you can't commit to the 7-8 weeks because of work schedules and time. I would suggest if you can ever down the road in the future get into a full session, you'll understand why it's set up and the curriculum is put together like that. The classes are designed to show you how to apply the techniques. I want to make that clear. It's not just a bunch of talking and speaking. That's part of it. We actually do exercises in those classes as a group, but there's work and you're shown the methods, the techniques, the concepts of how to actually work with whatever we're talking about. It's not just a bunch of jibber jabber back and forth. All right, so that's that. The ritual for this month, which we're approaching that quickly, August 30th, Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here in Fort Lauderdale. The ritual, the pentagram is set. If you would like to attend that ritual, send me an email to request an invite. If you are interested in a consultation or a spiritual reading, I do offer readings with the Lucifer and the Goetia demons. You could do a reading with the spirits of the dead, an Egyptian rune reading with the Natiru. You can do a reading with the Odishi, the Loa, or the Vodun deities. That's entirely up to you. If you are interested, specify what kind of reading you want. If you don't, I kind of just go with the flow. And when you contact me for a reading or a consultation, please specify the days and times you are available that best work for you, and also the time zone you live in. That's very important. It helps me plan in time, because I get people from not just in the United States, outside the United States, and all different time zones. I'm in Eastern Standard Time zone, so I need to correlate your time to my time so it works out for both of us. All right. And then the 3-day event, which is starting to grow, which I'm happy to see. And we already have, I think, 4 brand new presenters so far. Brand spanking new out the box. A lot of women going to be presenting at this event, which is going to be pretty cool. That's going to be the weekend, last weekend in October, the 25th to the 27th, right here in North Fort Lauderdale. It'll be a 3-day event of workshops, classes, and presentations. There'll be 3 different rituals we'll do that weekend, and we're kind of going to be hanging out. Also on the 25th of this month, on our brother Ravana Noon's channel, we're getting back together to do a class, get together a little bit more periodically again. He's doing stuff, some good stuff on Zoom. He's got a lot of classes he's put up there. We're going to get together and do one on, it's going to be good, people. Trust me when I tell you. Are you suffering from subjective disease? You don't want to miss this one. This is not going to be for the faint of heart. As you know, when we get together, it gets a little bit vulgar, not in a bad way. We're not going to cut no corners on this one. It's going to be an awakening, I think much needed. And we're finding out, a lot of people are talking about this right now. So there must be something in the ethers that we tapped into on this one. A lot of different people are talking about this, going in on it hard. I saw a video recently of Brother Panic talking about this. And I don't think it's a coincidence. And I think there was the Carson dude. I can't remember his first name. He was going in on this. And again, this is after the fact we decided. So if you want to tune into that class, you have to contact Brother Ravana Noon. His email is darkoccultist99@microsoft.com. You have to get an invite for this class. He does his on Zoom, and then he uploads them. It's kind of more interactive. You can see everybody, but you need to contact him to get an invite for this class. I have it posted on the Primordial Chaos Instagram. You'll see it. You'll also see it on his Instagram page. But again, make sure you contact him. He has to send you the link for the invite. It's on his platform. I'll eventually upload it here after he uploads it, so you'll be able to see it. But if you want to participate live when that goes on, you need to send him an email to request an invite. It's going to be a good class. So we've recently linked back up, and we're going to try to get together on his Zoom platform and do some classes in between with what he does and what we do here. All right. That's pretty much it. I think I covered what we needed to cover. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and Sister Oni will be up on deck. She'll be here Thursday night. We'll see everybody Thursday night, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. All right. Peace. Love, hair grease.